Hey guys, and welcome to another knife review. Right now I'm kind of doing a large spurt of knife reviews. I'm not sure when I'm going to upload them, but I just have a whole bunch of knives out here that I've just sharpened and that are ready to be sent back from one customer, Edgar. And I've sharpened them. A lot of them I've taken apart and tuned, and I just want to give you my thoughts on them before I send them back. Today, or in this video, we will be doing the Lionsteel SR1, specifically the TNP edition. And we are going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly on this knife. So like we're doing in a lot of my reviews right now, let's talk about the materials first. Right now, in the current runs of Lionsteel SR1s and 2s, we are dealing with, let's see if we can knock it clear, there we go, D2 steel. And specifically, I forget exactly, I don't think it's CPM D2, but I think it's German D2, that's what it is. It's called German D2. And I have to say, I kind of like German D2. I'm not sure how I like it compared to, standard D2, which I prefer. But let's talk about that steel and what makes it different. First, let's talk about what I like about actual original D2. I have sharpened many blades with D2, this being one of them. Whoops, almost dropped it. That would have been bad. I have sharpened it on a Browse Blade Sniper, this knife, of course the Lionsteel, a couple of other Browses, and I'm missing one, but and the Kershaw rake, I think this is. And I like it because it gets very, very sharp. Oops, lanyard got in the way there. Like the CTS B75P I talked about in my Southern Avo review, this knife gets sharper than any S35VN, any S30V, any 440C, or VG10 that I have sharpened. D2 is corrosive, it's susceptible to corrosion. It's not corrosion resistant, really. It's called a semi-stainless steel, a tool steel, and thus it's more susceptible to corrosion than most. In the German D2, I think they have kind of done something to the rust resistance. I could be wrong, but from what I've read and kind of my experience, whenever I sharpen this guy and I put tape over it, some of the water got in between the tape and the blade, and there was some rust specks, and I took care of it, but it was a little inconvenient. That's a common characteristic of D2 that I've noticed. And so whenever I peeled off the tape after I was done sharpening, I was expecting to have to do that, but it was clear. So they may have done something about that, or maybe I was just a little bit more careful whenever I taped it up. I don't know. But if I were to guess, I would say that German D2 is more corrosion resistant, which is great whenever you live where I do. I live in League City, Texas, right off Galveston, or right next to Galveston, I should say. And so it's a very humid climate. And if you live in a very similar climate, maybe German D2 is a nice steel choice for you. Anyway, it holds an edge for a relatively long time. I would say right up there with S35VN, S30V. But it holds a nicer edge than S35 and S30V. It's less prone to chipping, from what I've seen and in my experiences. So I think that's really all I have to say about the material of the blade. Handle material is a 6AL, or not a 6AL4V, sorry, a T6 6061 aircraft grade aluminum. That is the standard aluminum that the knife industry uses. And that's about all I have to say about that. It's anodized. It is prone to showing wear and carry marks, so keep that in mind. Now let's look at the construction. And this is where it gets a little interesting. It is a integral knife. Not integral meaning it's a frame lock. Integral meaning it's all a solid handle material. It is not, this handle is not like an Endura where you have two handle scales and you sandwich them together around a backspacer. This is not two separate pieces of titanium. This is one piece that was a solid piece of aluminum. Did I say titanium earlier? I meant aluminum. Anyway, that they've milled out to house the blade when it's closed. That's a pretty cool feature, especially to get on a, what do these run around, $180? The AL, the Lionsteel SR1 AL, I think around that price. And you know, most of the time those are only available by custom makers, and Anthony Marfione makes his Annex, that's an integral knife, and that ranges from, I think, like 900 to 16,000, something around there. And I know a lot of custom knife makers use this. The Spyderco Nirvana is a production version of a custom knife that is an integral, and that knife is like $3,000. The custom version, I mean. CKF has a integral knife called a Tegral. That's around $400. That is a titanium knife, however. But what I'm trying to say is that these are very rare, and to get one at the price point at $180 is pretty astounding, pretty cool. What are some problems that can arise with integral knives? Well, what I've heard, and I've talked to people that have had this problem, is that sometimes the aluminum can warp, especially when it's titanium. If it's titanium, I hear that it can warp and it can kind of pinch the blade. And that gives you really bad action. It's really difficult to move the blade because it's getting pinched by the handle scales. And that's just that's not cool. You know, that's not fun. This knife does not have that problem. And I'm sure if you do get one that's like that, Lionsteel will hook you up and will make it right. Now let's talk about, we're still talking about construction. Alright, let's move to execution. Execution of this knife. It is kind of chunky behind the edge. This is sharpened at 15 degrees per side, and you can see it's got a fairly wide bevel. Compare that to the XM18. It's a little bit thicker than that. Part of it might be because a lot of the knives I got from Edgar, he has a Lionsteel sharpening system, and he was trying to sharpen them, and the Lionsteel sharpening system kind of dicked the knives up, and you know, kind of jacked them up a little bit, and caused the bevels to be really broad without him being able to hit the apex. So he sent them to me to fix that problem, and these were mainly the main folding knives that had that problem. And you can see that they're all fairly broad, the secondary edge bevel. So that might be the fact that this SR1 is broad. It might be a result of that. But I mean, you look at the blade stock and it is pretty chunky. You do compare that to the Kershaw rake, which is a very similar size knife, and you can see that the blade stock is significantly more than the Kershaw rake. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Let's look at the Benchmade 710, and the 710 is a bigger knife, or a longer knife I should say, but the SR1 still has a thicker blade stock. So that's something to keep in mind. You're not going to be getting a great slicer if you get an SR1. It's not going to be like a laser through material. let's talk about the lockup and the pivot system. I should have talked about that with materials. This knife uses Teflon washers, much like the XM18. If you can get in there and see. There you go, Teflon washers. I used to have a problem with that. I gotta be honest. I used to think Teflon washers, psh, that's cheap. You know, that's like what Kershaw puts on them, and that's what gas station knives have. But I was wrong. First off, gas station knives and Kershaw knives use nylon type washers and nylon knockoff washers, and that's different than Teflon. Teflon is one of the slickest materials known to man. That's one of the reasons why these knives are very smooth, both the Lionsteel and the XM18. They're both very, very smooth. However, they're not as sturdy as phosphor bronze washers, which this knife has, which the Sebenza has, which is debatably one of the strongest frame locks out there. I would personally hold to that. I think it's a very strong frame lock. And the light is moving on into my space and messing up with it, so I'll try to wrap this review up quickly. Despite the fact that it's Teflon and that they lose a bit of stability, this knife is rock solid. I mean, I can get a little bit, maybe, there we go, at the tip I can get just a tiny bit of flex from those washers, but nothing to be worried about, nothing that makes it feel cheap. This knife feels very solid and very smooth. Moving on to execution, back to execution, I don't particularly like how they did this frame lock. Look at how far down the cutout goes. Compare that to the Sebenza and how far that one goes. Compare that to the Avo. The Avo goes to about, you can't see it, but it's about right here is where the Avo cutout goes to. The XM18, you can see that goes pretty low too. These knives have better frame lock geometry, in my opinion, because what happens whenever you have a short lock bar, a lock bar that the cutout doesn't go low to, is you get a knife with not a lot of lock bar tension and one that could develop lock rock. Whenever I had this knife apart, this lock bar, whenever I took the blade out, this lock bar only moved to about right here. It didn't get anywhere touching to this frame, which means that over time, if your lock wears past that point, you're going to have lock rock. This is a common thing that Lionsteel does. The DPX test, which None Fancy reviewed on his channel, that knife also had that problem, and that's what caused the lock rock, because he hard used it and the titanium bar didn't move over to compensate that wear, and because of that it had lock rock. Because I hope you're following what I'm saying, but it had lock rock because this lock bar didn't move over and wasn't contacting the frame the way it should, because it didn't have enough tension to get over there. Spring tension, I guess. Anyway, so that may or may not be a problem with this knife. It is a steel on steel knife, so maybe, just maybe, if you own this knife, it'll never move, and you will never have to worry about that. But if you hard use your knives, that may become a problem. Then again, maybe not. I'm just telling you what I know. This is gonna kind of be more of an overview than a review, I guess, because I have not owned or carried this knife. This is just my kind of impressions and what I know after sharpening and taking it apart and handling it. It does have a hinderer stabilizer like the Avo and the hinderer, you know, the knife it was made for originally. This keeps you from overextending your lock bar and tweaking the frame, and it keeps you from pushing the lock bar downward and further in and messing up the geometry and possibly messing up the lock bar interface or whatever. talking about execution, let's talk about centering. Centering is off to the right. I could probably tighten this down and move it over, but then I would lose some of the action and the freeness. Pocket clip. Pocket clip is tip down only, and it is mounted by this glass breaker. However, this glass breaker, you need their tool to take apart, and normally you wouldn't need to do that unless you're lefty, or if you bent the clip out like this guy. And he really has no way to fix it other than getting that tool and taking it apart and bending the pocket clip back out, which kind of sucks. It reminds me of Microtech, and a lot of people ding Microtechs on that, so I feel like I should ding this knife on that. Also, this knife's pivot is not D-shaped, meaning there's nothing that keeps the pivot in there from spinning around. A D-shape, the pivot's D-shaped and there's a D-shaped hole, which keeps that pivot from spinning around in the handle. But this does not have that. So if these are both Loctited down, you might need 2 screwdrivers to take the pivot apart, and you should definitely Loctite it when you put it back together, or else you're going to get some spinning going on there, and then it'll loosen up more and you'll get blade play and bad centering. A lot of people don't get that. I mean, a lot of people don't get those pivots, and I just watched this one video the other night. I'm not going to name any names, but this guy dinged the knife because he said he would get it, he would flip it open like 50 to 100 times, and then the blade would move over, and he never mentioned that he would get blade play, but I'm sure that he would, or he did, and he just didn't mention it, or he didn't check. But that means you need to Loctite your pivot, dude. That's what a lot of knives have to do from the factory. That's like 80% of knives, production knives. Heck, even the Avo at Midtech and the Hinderer. Only the Sabenzo doesn't, in my opinion. But these knives need Loctite, guys. All right. A lot of companies do them from the factory, but if they don't, or if you take your knife apart, you need to Loctite it back up, or you're gonna have problems with centering and blade play over time. All right. So that's kind of a ramble. I'm getting off topic, but that just kind of infuriated me because he dinged the knife on that, and I didn't agree with it. Let's talk about 2 points, and then we will get to the final the final negative that I have on this knife. They have crowned the spine, and that's very nice. It feels comfortable. It gives the knife a nice sleek look. It's not rounded as well as the Sabenza, as aggressively. If you look at that, you can see it's kind of aggressively rounded compared to the Lionsteel. It's got some rounding to it, and that's an extra machining process, and I appreciate that they did that on the knife. I dinged the Avo on something similar, and I'm gonna ding this knife on it. It's a common problem with production knives, and it is the fact that they have a terrible finger choil, or a sharpening choil on here, that does not clear the plunge grind, which means you get very thick unsharpened edge here, that if you do sharpen, flares out the handle. The Apostle P talks about this a lot on his channel, and me as a sharpener, I hate it just as much as he does. I just fixed it a different way. He likes to get a Dremel or a sander or something and put a finger choil there or something. I just don't sharpen it, and I explained to my customer why I didn't. Most of them are cool with it. A couple had some more questions about it, and I sent them to one of the Apostle P's videos, and we got that cleared up. Finally, this may just be because this knife is a dud, but this knife pretty much has no detent. I mean, like, listen as I close it. You can just hear it. There's like barely any detent. Compare that to the XM18. La Sabenza. The Evo. Paramilitary. Alright, you get the picture. At least I hope you do. That's very alarming, I guess, because since this is tipped down, I can picture it opening up, you reaching down, and that cuts your finger. I had that happen with the cold steel. It was going through the break-in process with the triad lock. If you don't know what that means, I don't have time to explain it in this video, but you can ask me in the comments. And it just, you know, it's a safety issue. Also, it makes it a little bit difficult to deploy this knife. You can't deploy it by going out in this direction. Maybe if you really see, what I have to do to flick this knife is I have to build pressure in this direction, and then, oh, see, it misfired there, and then change directions and then flip it. If you sent this to Lionsteel, they could probably fix it, but it's something that should never have left the factory, especially on a TNP edition, a special edition of the knife. So that's all I have to say about this, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you own a Lionsteel SR1, let me know your thoughts on it, your experiences, and if you're thinking about buying one, keep in mind those negatives and the positives of this knife before you buy it. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more knife reviews. Bye.